Porch Stories is a weekly summer oral history program hosted by the Island County Museum in beautiful waterfront Coupeville, Washington, on equally beautiful Whidbey Island. Our guest speakers for this fun 45-minute program are local folks sharing local history. It is casual, interactive, and fun for anyone from anywhere. Locals and tourists from around the world gather for this weekly event. Porch Stories runs from mid-May through mid-September every Wednesday from 2 to 2:45 p.m. We invite you to join us on the porch, if the weather's not too bad. The following porch story features Mr. Ron Van Dyk, also known as the Telephone Guy. Ron is a master historian and storyteller. This installment is from summer of 2019 and is titled The First Phone Booth in Coupeville. Porch Stories is always free thanks to the support from Whidbey Island Bank, Windermere Real Estate Coupeville, the Friends of Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve, and your Island County Historical Society. Enjoy! We're going to get things rolling.
Alrighty.
That's okay with you, sir?
Sounds like a winner.
Does everybody know this guy?
Yes. Probably not. I'm usually
John might have my
incognito.
out-of-town family.
Oh! This fine gentleman is Mr. Ron Van Dyk. Ron, you've been on Whidbey Island for how long?
Oh, almost since they poured the rock here. But, well, I was born here, just up the street, and where the big rock is, if any of you know the big erratic up there, you can't hardly tell it's a rock because it's covered with ivy, but it's big. Actually, we have two of them. We've got one out here underwater, and then there's one on South Whidbey too, I guess. I've never seen it. It's big.
Oh,
You were born on the rock?
Under.
I didn't want to go there.
Well, I knew you'd be.
Anyway, Ron's been here a long time, and he was known for many years as the phone guy, because that's what you did.
Yeah, the phony phone guy.
And what got me on the phone to call Ron was this really cool photo, and I'll pass this around. But I'm going to read the caption because that's what really got me. It's captioned "Hello Central." I don't know. There wasn't a year on this. Do you remember what year this might have been?
Oh, it would have been probably around the 1970s.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would say probably.
Early 70s.
Yeah.
Something like that. It says, "Hello Central. Telephone installer Ron Van Dyk of Oak Harbor was genuinely puzzled Monday when this picture was taken. The telephone in Coupeville's Front Street booth was operating okay." This is our first phone booth, by the way. "For some reason, which escaped the photographer, Van Dyk had expected the telephone in the newly installed antique booth not to function." Take it away, Ron.
Thank you for that very warm introduction.
We've got one at the end of the program.
And we're going to maybe do things a little differently today. Generally, most of the speakers here are very well prepared, and they bring in a lot of artifacts and things to illustrate what they're talking about. And unfortunately, I have a lot of that stuff, but it's either too big or it's in my collection where I can't find it. So you're just going to have to put up with me today, I'm afraid. But anyway, since Rick has introduced me as the telephone man, I did work here for West Coast Telephone Company for many years, and until it became General Telephone. Now it's Verizon or something. I don't know what they do anymore. But to give you a little historical background on the phone system here, originally it was set up as a farmer's exchange by Dr. Race, who was a local druggist here. His drugstore was in the Need and Feed building, and it was a very simple affair. They had just room for a little switchboard in there and an operator, and it was only manned for several hours during each day, and then you had to go see your neighbors if you didn't want to wait for the operator to come back. So anyway, later, the West Coast Telephone Company took that over, and they built a central office up on the corner of Main and Alexander. It's a little white stuccoed building, kind of hidden in the bushes there, and that was a manual telephone office also. And they had operators in there, 2 operators. And eventually, the town outgrew that, so they finally went to a dial system, and that was located up, well, the office is still up there on the crest of the hill up near the hospital. So the original phone office then was in that same building that the Need and Feed is in, where their kitchen area is. That's where the central office was. And that's about the only remnants of that. Actually, before I got into these subjects, I wanted to bring up the names of some folks that I'd like to have remembered that have actually helped make all of this possible. And at the top of the list was Miss Jimmy Jean Cook. And I don't know how many of you were familiar with her name. Jimmy Jean was the author of Pen Cove, A Particular Friend. And then she also instigated, I guess you would say, getting Front Street on the National Register as a historic community. And she just loved this area, and she had one of the old Victorians up here, the James Zelster House, which is up near the courthouse. She worked in the courthouse for years in the auditor's office. And so she had access to all of the old records going way back to the early 1800s. And so that's what she based her book on. Now, that book is available here at the museum if any of you care to ever look for it. And the second one is, well, actually the third one, the late Roger Sherman, who just passed away here in December. Yeah, well, anyway, I feel kind of humble compared to Roger. He was always so prepared for these talks, and he had such a knowledge of all of our history here, but mainly the maritime history. And he's a hard act to follow. So you'll have to put up with me as long as I can keep standing. And so what I thought we might do is ask you folks to ask me some questions about things that you're curious about. There must be things here in town that you'd like to know about, and if I don't know the answer, I'll lie to you about it. And we'll come up with something and make it up. Yeah, there you go. And anybody that likes to chime in, and here's Mr. Lee, James, go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, what kind of telephone service did you have down here during the Ghost Town era?
Well, that was...
Let me preface that. Ghost Town refers to... Rick can fill us in on that because he came here by bicycle from Port Townsend just to see the ghost.
Oh.
They rode from the ferry where they dropped him off up to town, and I don't know what you did here. Did you ever talk on the phone?
No, we basically just rode our bikes through town and climbed in the blockhouse and played around. And
Did your mother know where you were?
yeah, she said be home in time for dinner.
That's how it was.
No problem. I think it was 35 cents to come across the ferry.
Did you see a ghost?
Not until later, when I started working here.
And probably a trip or two to Toby's Tavern.
Never seen one. Never seen one. I've
Is
heard
this-
voices.
Is this a benefit that the volunteers can partake of?
Sure.
Seeing the ghost?
Yeah, get big bucks for that.
You may hear it, but you probably won't see
Tonight.
it.
Well, that's an interesting subject. Actually, the telephone system here was a little primitive, probably when Rick was on his bicycle.
Yeah.
You still had to crank them. you didn't have them in your pocket like I do. You know, this is undoubtedly the end to all communications. It's faster than smoke signals, but it's not as much fun. So anyway, so anyone else have a question or two? That yes, ma'am.
How much would they go down with weather? You know, the poles. How much repairing would you be doing?
Quite a bit. We didn't have treated poles, and they had a tendency to rot off at the base. And every time we had a wind storm, we'd lose several poles. They'd either be laying out in the road or, well, one of them, in fact, I don't know if any of you have ever seen these purple insulators. I used to collect them, and I'd keep some clear glass ones in the truck, and if I'd spot one, I'd go up and get it, change them out. And I was doing that over near Oak Harbor one afternoon, and as I reached out to get the insulator, the pole did break off. And
Oh my gosh.
I was on my way down across the highway there.
Wow.
But anyway, the wires held, and so I was able to get my insulator and get down and hope that nobody had seen that little act. Like you could call it a high wire act, I guess.
Oh, God.
But that was the good old days. And another thing that used to happen here was the I don't know if you're familiar with the game farm out here. It's now the Institute of
Oh, Pacific Rim Institute.
Pacific Rim, yes. And those fields used to be full of pheasants. The state was raising the birds out there for hunters, actually.
Oh, wow.
And the starlings, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, they would come in there in droves and to get the feed that they were feeding the pheasants. And then a truck or something that made a lot of noise would come along, and all of a sudden all of these things would land up in the phone lines, and we had open wire at those times. And when they would take off, they would wrap all those lines together. So when I'd get up to the central office, I'd have a whole array of trouble lights on there of things, and then I had to go out and find out where they were at. And it was usually right there at the game farm. And so that was sort of the primitive type. And we still had a farmer line here when I first came to the phone company. The Shermans maintained that out on the prairie out here, and it was a magneto line. You still had to crank your phone. And everybody, it was a social event when they'd hear the bell ring. Everybody would get on there to see who was on and what the latest news was from around town. So, you know, we've lost all that now. It's, of course, we have other diversions. The internet is easily reached, and, you know, I guess the world knows almost everything we're all doing. So it's quite an improvement, I guess.
A bigger party line.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do digress, and if anyone else has a topic or
What was the company?
sorry?
the switchboard?
Well, the first one was right up. Do you know where the Need and Feed restaurant is?
Yeah.
Okay, up on the top floor where the coffee shop is, there's a little room which is now their kitchen there, and that was the central office. They had a small switchboard in there, and it was magneto, and that was the old crank type, and so that was our phone communications at that time.
So did you have somebody call Central?
Yes.
Call up there and talk to Central to get connected to the.
Well, I don't remember those days, but we did have that. That was before they put in what they called a Stoger step-by-step automatic switching unit in the old central office, which is up at the McPherson folks own that building. And that ties in with what I wanted to also mention about where we're at today. That building was the first Highland County Historical Society museum, and it was used for that purpose, and there wasn't hardly any room in there, but we managed to display. Rick can embellish on that quite a bit of the history. And then later, the museum outgrew that and needed larger quarters. So the fire department had just vacated their building across the street here and moved the museum into that. Prior to that, the Fort Casey was being surplused. After the Army decommissioned it, it was in caretaker status for a number of years, and then they decided to sell all that land off out there. And so a developer from Seattle had it platted out, and I guess they finally started to think about what it was going to take to remove all that concrete and all those bunkers out there. And they kind of backed out on that deal. And we had a state parks commissioner that was a prominent member of our community in Oak Harbor by the name of Ron Van Dyk. I don't know if that name rings a bell to anybody. Actually, everybody called him Goosey Van Dyk, and I don't know how he got that title, but anyway, John went to bat and got the state to ante up some money and buy that land up there. So the state couldn't afford the whole fort, so they divided it in half. Seattle Pacific College bought the lower half, which is where all the housing is. And so that's an interesting place out there, and always welcoming the folks to come out and view the grounds, the lighthouse, and it's just a really unique fort, or state park actually. One of the better ones, I think, in Washington State. And so there I get off the track again.
I'll get you back on the track.
Yes. ma'am.
So was there actually a phone booth in Coupeville?
Yep, right. See where that tree is in front of the fish wheel?
Uh-huh.
Okay, it sat right there.
Oh, cool.
And it was a little red. It doesn't show that in Rick's black and white photo, but it was painted red.
So it was that phone booth right there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
A young man that I went to school with fashioned the roof on it, which was shakes. At the time that booth appeared here, Coupeville, as Rick says, was more or less a ghost town down here. Very few active businesses here. They'd all moved up on the hill where they had parking and more visibility. And so everything down here was just largely forgotten. And we had a family by the name of McPhee came to Coupeville, and Mrs. McPhee, Betty McPhee, felt that Coupeville should be a Wild West town. It looked like something out of a Wild West movie. So she promoted that, and that was part of why you'll see some strange looking architecture here that wasn't original, and it never materialized into anything. And then finally people began to wake up to the fact that this was a seafaring community, and we're a waterfront entity, and we're probably the closest thing to some of the maritime national monuments back on the East Coast. I think we're probably as close as you'll ever get to that. The wharf out here is one of the very few existing in Washington State that's still original. Port Townsend has one or two over there, but they're either reproductions or have been rebuilt because they've either fallen in the water or burned. And this one has some serious structural problems also, and they're not sure what the fate of this one will be. It's going to cost a fortune to put new pilings under it, and how they're going to do that is a mystery, because you got all the businesses in there. You can't cut holes in the floor anymore like they used to and drop a piling in. And how they did it in the old days was they would take a fire hose and lash it to the bottom of the piling, and then with a nozzle on it, they would just start sluicing the piling down in. They could cut a hole in the warehouse floor, lower the piling down through there, and then with high pressure sluice it out for a hole so it would settle down. You can't do that anymore, so I don't know how they're gonna save the old building out there. We also at one time had a port commissioner that felt it was an attractive nuisance and it ought to go. So he proposed that the port tear the building down and just keep the pier out there for kids to fish off there and swim out there. Well, it's not very good fishing out there. And,
Who was that?
well, I don't know. I don't think I should mention the name because I think he's still alive. So we'll let that one go, and I can tell you in private. But anyway, it is there. It's unique, and I think all of us want to see it kept there, and as long as it can. And so anyway. I
How
was
about
trying-
the first power building that was behind Toby's?
Well, now that's a mystery to me because I always understood that the powerhouse here was on the site where the rec hall is. And it burned back in the 20s, and then we didn't have Puget Power or Puget Energy. We didn't have anything here. You just either had kerosene lamps or and that was about it. Which brings up an interesting little tidbit too. We had the Circuit Theater here on Front Street that was quite an attraction because it was the only theater in this area. And they had a big motor generator set in there that generated direct current using the alternating current that the town generator could provide. And when they would show a movie, that the carbon arc lamps would draw so much juice that they couldn't keep the street lights on here. They didn't have many street lights anyway, and very few homes had electricity in them, so there wasn't any big load on it. So anyway, if you wanted to see the whole movie, they would have to get people to reduce the load, turn the street lights off, and let the movie go. Then they could turn the street lights back on, but they went off at midnight anyway, so. And there probably was, I doubt if there was 3 street lights on this whole street. And there was at one time oil lamps and gas lamps. A lot of homes here too had carbide gas in their homes, and it was generated in a generator which was a mixture of water and carbide, and it generated carbide gas when you mix the two. And so it made a nice white light, and it could be deadly if you left it going and didn't turn those lights off when they weren't in use. So Sherman's had one up on their farm, and Roger always bemoaned the fact that they didn't save that and have that as an example of how people lighted their homes and businesses. So that's another little tidbit that is gone forever, I guess. And think about the town. There must be things around here you've seen that you wonder, how did that get there? What is that? And what purpose did it serve?
Well, I read somewhere, I don't want anybody to take this wrong, that when the Navy moved into Elk Harbor, a lot of Coupeville businesses left here and went up there. Is that true?
Well, it was competitive, that's for sure. Oak Harbor was always more of a commercial center than Coupeville was. And when the Navy came here, there were so many changes that you wouldn't hardly compare the commerce to it. The Navy brought a lot of money onto the island at that time, and they weren't always welcomed here. Many of the original settlers in Oak Harbor were Dutch farmers, Irish farmers, and they had worked their lives to clear raw land here when they came here. And they all built homes, big barns, and actually raised some world record crops of wheat here. And at Altfield, or what is Altfield now, that was called Clover Valley, was the old name for it. And when the Navy came, they needed flat land and for the runways. And the bases that were established here were the Seaplane Base and Altfield. Altfield was designed as a rearming base. It was only supposed to be there for the war, and then it was going to be removed. Well, obviously that never happened. The Seaplane Base was built as a permanent station, and it was for seaplanes, the old PBYs, which you can see over in Oak Harbor. There's one on display over there. They had a fleet of those, and that was the really the most modern type aircraft at that time. Now they're just a real curiosity. But there was a lot of them flying around here, and some interesting stories of those too. But the Navy's had quite a drastic influence on our island, and I imagine that most of you are familiar with their presence here. We hear them frequently, and some wish maybe that they could fly elsewhere. But
What is the Henny's company would be telephoning the company you work for? I mean, does Henny's only go up halfway, or?
yes, the South Whidbey Telephone Company was always an independent. And from what I understand historically, they were all farmers' lines down there. And they didn't have cable in those days. Everything was open wire. So they did have a lot of barbed wire fences. And they actually connected those barbed wire fences up as phone lines. And it was pretty primitive. And you know, the cows could put your line out with just a very little effort. So eventually, Mr. Dave Henny came to the island, and apparently, from what I remember, his parents had bought that phone company down there for him as a wedding present. And his wife was a switchboard operator, and he trained her to climb poles, which she did, and did repair work down there. And they were always a pretty stiff competitor to the West Coast Telephone Company. And while I was working for them, my boss would always bemoan how primitive they were down there. And actually, they were doing things there like undergrounding their cables and things that we weren't doing up here. And we used to finally had an agreement with them to extend their services into West Coast territory. At one time, that was verboten. You just didn't run across that border. And the border is down south of Greenbank. There's one little phone booth sitting there alongside the road.
Classic road.
Yep, and the classic road. That's it, Judy. And that was the demarcation between the north and the south, the ends of the island. And you dare not cross that boundary unless you had good reason to be down there. So anyway, Mr. Henney was a very progressive and intelligent young man. Right after I got out of high school, I went down there to see him about getting a job with that company. And when I got down there, went into his central office, his wife was sweeping up. They were rolling the switchboard around on casters, and it just had a cable going from it up through the wall and a whole bunch of drop wires coming in from the street. And it was still pretty primitive, but he eventually built a new central office at, down there, Bayview Corner, and put in really the top line equipment in there. And he was always very progressive. And it's still in the Henney family.
Wow.
And the young Henneys, I understand, are the owners and operators of South Whidbey Telephone.
Wow.
And Marion's still alive and well too.
Oh, is that right?
Wow.
She doesn't
Oh,
like
that's right.
poles anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, probably not.
In fact, they've got a very nice display here. Rick can tell you all about that, how that came about.
Well, and they took the old phone exchange in Langley and they're turning that into a phone museum right next to the South Whidbey Museum.
Ah.
Yep.
The central office originally was right behind the old bank building, which I think is a gallery of some sort, isn't it? It's a stucco building, looks completely out of place in Langley, but the central office was just a little box of a building, sat right behind that. And then, I don't know what's in there now, they moved it and took it up on the hill, and it's been sitting in a field up there for a long time. Well, actually, it went out by the fairgrounds.
Yeah, no, they moved it from the fairgrounds up to where you were talking about.
Yeah.
But now it's right next to the museum.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. they're
Oh,
restoring
very
it.
good.
Yep.
Well, that's great, because they have an awful lot of the old original equipment. And so anyone that's interested in telephones, certainly take a look at this display in here. And Rick actually has a working telephone line in there that you can, one is in the hall, isn't
It's
it?
kind of on the fritz right now.
Oh, it is? Oh, battery's dead?
No.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
You need the
We should get you to
repairman.
come in and look at it.
I can probably do that. Actually, they did use batteries.
It only works one way right now, so if you could fix it.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at it.
I couldn't talk in it when the kids
Yeah.
rang.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's a one-way line.
Yeah,
Yeah. I got a question.
surely.
How many years did you work in telephone work?
Well, I started in 1955 with Ma Bell down in Seattle.
Yeah.
That was the only time that I ever got shipped off the island.
Yeah.
And a cousin of mine also worked for Bell, and so he gave me this cap. Kind of a neat logo that they had. I don't know. I don't think this exists anymore. So that's it's kind of the end of the line. And so I worked in Seattle, both in the exchanges and out on the lines for probably about 7 years. And then the Army wanted my services. I didn't want them, and so I joined the Navy and ended up down in San Diego for some time, and years there. That was the only time I've really been off the island for any length of time. So anyway, when I came back, my job was still waiting for me in Seattle, and I worked there for about 6 months, and there was an opening with West Coast here, and so I took it, and they put me in charge of the central office here. And so I had, I didn't maintain the office. That was done by technicians from Oak Harbor. But I did maintain the lines, and I installed and repaired the phones that were in existence. And so it was a nice thing. I got to know almost everybody here because I'd be in their homes, for some reason or other. and we used to get together for coffee. All the merchants up here. Ted Christensen was the pharmacist in those days, and he and his wife had a clothing store and drug store side by side. The building is there. I think the Cougars are in there now. What's
WSU.
WSU? Yeah. And anyhow, Ted had a soda fountain in the drugstore, and so most of the merchants would come in there at a certain time in the morning, and we'd all have coffee together and shake dice to see who was going to pay for it. It was really a neat deal in
Nice,
those days.
yeah.
But I almost got fired because the company didn't feel that it was good representation to have an employee hobnobbing with our customers. So anyway, that came to an end. But anyway, what else can I tell you that?
I've got the second part of my question.
Oh,
In your many years as a telephone guy, did you ever, do you have any tales you can share with us, gossip about people? You don't have to mention names. No names. It's just all the community.
well,
You had to have seen some rather unusual
would you
things.
like me to tell you a
Can we
story
repeat
about
that
the one
question?
time I got arrested?
Huh?
Have a comment?
Yes.
You were saying?
Sure.
We had a tower up behind our central office here that was about 100 feet tall. And we had a microwave set up for long distance telephone calls from here to Everett. And I and some of my fellow employees used to get together after work at one of the local watering holes, and we started talking about experiences of climbing. And one of the fellas told about climbing up on top of a water tank with a 6-pack of beer, and when the police came up there to get him, they threw the bottles at the policeman down on the ground. And we thought, you know, we could do better than that. So we came up here in the middle of the, well, not the middle of the night, it was probably about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, dark anyway, and we decided to climb that microwave tower. So we got up there and we're kind of hooping and hollering, and the fellas that took us up there left, came down here to what used to be Seeley's Tavern. And so while we were up there looking at the scenery, we saw another car come driving in. Thought the guys had come back to pick us up. So we thought it was time to get down. So we got down there, and when we got down there, the town marshal, who was Mr. Short, was waiting for us, and he said, "What were you boys doing up there?" And it had a big red light on top, aircraft clearance type thing. We said, "We were just up there checking the bulb in that light." I said, "Yeah, I bet you were." I said, "I want to give you a ride." So he put us in the patrol car, took us down to the courthouse, and got our driver's license. And I thought we were probably going to spend the night there, but and then I thought, tomorrow our jobs have begun. But nothing was ever said, and Ed, the marshal, became a really close friend. We have a movie, one of the early arts and crafts festivals here, and I came down here with a movie camera to take pictures of it, and Ed was driving the patrol car up there when I had my camera ready, and so he hunkered down behind the wheel like he was going to run over me, and I know that film is here on VHS tape somewhere, but I have the original if we can ever figure out a way to show it. Yeah. So anyway, that's about the worst that I can remember. There were a few other things too, but better
Worst
let
you
them
can
lie.
admit to.
Yeah.
Tell the story of the Ferris wheel.
Oh, Well, when I was just knee-high to a grasshopper, they had the water festivals here. This would have been prior to World War II. They'd close off this street and have a carnival set up here. And my folks had brought us over here, or brought me over. I don't remember, I don't think my brother was born yet. And they had the Ferris wheel set up about, in front of the Front Street Grill there. And somebody started shooting off fireworks, and they lobbed one up into the power lines there and put all the lights in town off. Well, that shut down the carnivals and the Ferris wheel, and everybody was up on the top there wondering, now what do we do? And they, for some reason, didn't seem to be able to crank it down. And so that was my early remembrances of excitement in Coupeville, which wasn't very exciting, but I can remember.
It would have been exciting if you'd been up on top.
Very true, yeah. But I do remember another thing that my folks talked about in those days, although I don't remember seeing this, but up in the park, there used to be a dance stand up there. It was actually a pavilion, up right where the stage is. And the Indians would go in there during the festivals, and they had some sort of a bone game that they played. And they were very into it. It was gambling, and I wish that there was somebody that knew more about what that was, because it's something that should be really recorded. And but that's just another. Then the dance pavilion finally just rotted away, and they tore it down, and so there wasn't anything in the park until the
Concerts on the
Howells. Yeah, Howells came here. David Howell. I don't know if any of you would know them. David came.
They're in town.
I'm sorry.
They live in town now.
Yeah, they've been here. In fact, they operated the coffee shop out on the pier there for quite some time. But in the olden days, David was an opera singer in San Francisco. So when he got up here, he felt that Coupeville needed a little culture. So he proposed concerts in the park. And he was instrumental in getting the stage built. And we've had concerts in the park up there. In fact, I don't know if anybody here was in on the visitation of the whale exhibit that came through, and that is, I think, the last exhibit or event that I can remember used that stage. But it was very interesting. They had Native Americans there, and a lot about the whale culture and how they're being decimated. Yeah.
Lolita.
There you go. They're still hoping to free Lolita and bring her back out here to the Northwest. She was one of the earliest whales that were taken out here. And you probably all know the story of that. An entrepreneur from Seattle by the name of Ted Griffith came in here with, well, this cove used to be a feeding ground for the orcas, and so every year we'd get a pod of them or two in here, and so Griffith decided that they would be profitable to sell them to various marine exhibits, and so he did. He caught I don't know how many he took from here, but it was probably half a dozen. But in the process, he, or his crew, killed several of the young ones. And rather than own up to it, they weighted him down and sank him in the end of the cove down here. Well, they didn't stay down there forever. And when they came to the surface, people found out what had happened there, and there was almost a war there. The news media got in on it, and they were flying aircraft over, taking pictures of the whales in their pens down there, and the aircraft were being threatened with guns by the people on the rafts that had the whales in them, and so it was almost a civil war went on here. So that was one of the big events that came about. And what else have we?
How about, you talked about a giant glacial erratic out here in Penn Cove?
Yeah.
I know there's some other things out there that we can't see because the water covers them.
Yes.
Is there still, I heard there is a truck off the end of the wharf out there.
There.
You know about that?
Yeah, Roger went down on that. The EOD from the base came over here because it was an armored vehicle of some sort. And nobody knows how it got there or where it came from. And apparently, I don't think there was a gun mounted on it, but there was a lot of ammunition down there. So the Navy's EOD team came over and cleaned all that up. And one of the things that Roger Sherman found, he went down there again to see if he could identify this vehicle. Of course, it's in bad shape, you know, being in salt water all these years, it's practically disintegrated. But he did find a porcelain mug down there that had one of the Navy squadrons painted on it. It was done by Williams, that lives over in Skagit County, that used to produce
Bob
these.
Williams.
Bob Williams produce custom coffee cups and other things. And anyway, Roger gave it to me because neither one of us drank coffee at that time. So I had it for a long time, and then when David opened up the salty mug out there, I took it out and gave it to him, and he had it on display out there for a long time. And so he gave it back to me when he left his coffee shop out there, but he said later that the folks that have it now would like to have that cup back. So maybe I'll get a free cup of coffee for that. But anyhow, yeah. So when Raj and I went one time down on that rock out there, and it is big, probably not as big as the one up at Prairie Center, but it had some of the old metal, like narrow gauge train wheels. And the only thing we could figure out, they probably came from the Lovejoy sawmill down here when it was in operation. And I don't know how many of you know that there was a sawmill in Coupeville that was quite large, and it's down where the sewage plant is, and it's now called Captain Coop Park. But anyway, we figured that those wheels probably had been on some sort of carts that they rolled the lumber around on. It had to have been on tracks. We don't know for sure, but it was kind of interesting to see some of the debris that was down there. And I'm sure that the bottom is covered with all kinds of stuff because the water was used as a dumping ground for everything. You know, that used to be that the cities barged all their garbage out into the deeper water, dumped it, and now we're still paying the price. You know, there's these massive garbage islands in the Pacific, I suppose in the Atlantic too, maybe not, but we pay for our sins in one way or the other. And so anyway, no matter what, it'd be interesting to see this go dry for a day or so and see just what is out there.
That would be amazing.
Might be a little frightening.
Yeah.
One last parting thing.
Sure.
Tell us about this photo and then send it around if you will.
Well, you know, I should have Judy tell you about this because she's the one that took it.
Ah.
And
You're the one that risked
Judy,
your
that's,
life.
yeah, well, you can see I had a lot of help. And you'll see it's the flagpole that's out front here.
Oh, okay.
And they had gotten the lanyard in it off the pulley at the top. And it seemed like such a fragile little flagpole that they couldn't get anybody to, and we didn't have any basket trucks or lifts like we have today that could get anybody up there. So, because I'd sort of had experience in pole climbing, I got recruited to go up and free that lanyard. So Judy, bless her heart, had her camera when we did this, and some of the old timers there. We've been trying to figure out who they were, but
Val Arnold, bottom left.
oh, is it Val in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Val, and
I think Mike Putnam might
on
be.
the right in the red shirt is Mike Pye.
Okay.
Very good.
Just before or after your trip to the tavern?
If you notice in the background, there's a little building back there. It's got shakes or shingles on it.
Yeah.
Well, that was this site that we're comfortably ensconced on was the site of the one of the oldest operating inns in the state of Washington. And I believe it was called the Starwanda, was it not?
It's one of the
Among
names.
others, yeah.
Yeah,
Blockhouse Inn.
Blockhouse Inn in later years, yeah. And it occupied almost the footprint of this museum building, a little closer to the street. But anyway, it was a real landmark here, and the folks that were running it, he, as I understand, was a chef, and they served great meals in there. And it became sort of a boarding house. And then in later years, it kind of became, well, what would you call it? Kind of a home for wayward drunks. And Mrs. Williams, who was the widow of Mr. Williams, was running it, and a lot of these old timers were her friends, so she'd let them stay here. Well, apparently, one of them must have had a little bit too much to drink and dropped his cigarette somewhere in here, and the building went up in flames. So, in that photograph, you won't see anything of that building now because it had been taken down by that time.
Yeah.
But that little building in the background, that was had been a garage, and then it was converted to an apartment. And I mentioned Roger Sherman. When he was first married, he and his wife lived in there for a while. And then when the plan for the museum came about, the building was given to
Val Arnold.
Val Arnold, and she had it moved over onto Alexander Street. And you
Copeland.
can't see it from here, but
Copeland.
it's Coupeville. Oh, okay. And anyway, it was a travel agency which Val operated for a number of years, and I'm not sure what's in there now.
Well, there's a therapist down below.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a massage therapist on
Upstairs too?
the main floor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I still have some of those shakes underneath the
Oh,
house
do
that we
you?
built over here.
No kidding. Wow.
She took all the shakes off.
Oh, okay. They look kind of neat in this photo, that having them on there. There's another little, if we've got time, sidebar
Almost, yep.
to this story. There was a house that used to sit where these condos are, and a elderly lady by the name of Mrs. Sill lived in there, and her son, I guess it was her son, his name was Evans White, and he was a gunsmith. And this little building that we were talking about, the Val salvage, he had his gun shop in there. Well, the blockhouse has been here for probably 100+ years, So the town just always assumed that it was property of the town. Well, one day there was a rude awakening, and it appeared in the paper that the University of Washington was buying our blockhouse. And of course there was an immediate reaction, and found out that the property that that blockhouse sat on belonged to the Sill estate, and Evans White was the inheritor of that piece of property. So he was selling the blockhouse for $6,000 or $7,000 to the U. Well, the town then woke up and said, well, you know, we can't lose that. That's one of our biggest tourist attractions. So they started drives, bake sales, and you name it, to raise money to save the blockhouse. And today, if any of you are beachcombers, and you go over on the other side of the dock, and you go down there, there's an octagon-shaped concrete pad down there. That had been in the front yard of the blockhouse, and it had a wishing well on it for people to put coins in there to help save the blockhouse. I don't remember how it finally came about that the town saved it, and then it became part of the museum's property. But we should be thankful that we had folks, and I mentioned Dr. Race. Dr. Race was the instigator for the establishment of the Island County Historical Society. And what happened was we had a great old Victorian courthouse here. It was built by the Lovejoy brothers, who built so many of our old Victorian homes here. And it was getting kind of shabby, and it was really undersized for the size of the county. So the commissioners voted to build a new courthouse. And that's the annex to the new courthouse, which is up near the law in just a second. The old courthouse was then vacated, just sat there empty. Dr. Reese thought Coupeville needs a museum. And Dr. Reese's house is up here in the park. It's a log house that was moved from Hasty Lake over here, added on to, and it's a beautiful structure up there. It's on private property, so don't try to walk up and go in to look at it. But anyway, so Dr. Race tried to get the county to allow him to obtain the ownership of that courthouse and then to establish a museum in there. Well, the commissioners in their infinite wisdom said, no, because we'll end up with the responsibility of maintaining it. And I said, we are getting rid of it because it's costing the county too much. So they tore it down. Well, there's still a remnant of it up there. There's a 2-story block that's sitting up behind a duplex house up there. And, you know, it looks so out of place because it doesn't seem to have any purpose. Well, it was the vaults of the courthouse. And because it was all reinforced concrete, when they tore the courthouse down, the guy that was doing the demolition didn't want to have to try to dispose of those vaults. So anyway, I was a young buck back then. I think I was still in, I must have been in high school. But anyway, I bought the doors out of the vaults, the 2 up in the top floor. And somewhere in the museum collection, we have those. And,
Right below us.
Right below us? Oh, I thought they got moved someplace. So there is a little memory of the old courthouse on hand here. And that's, I guess, we're probably running out of time. You're all still awake, so that's a good sign. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for your participation.
So next week, Robert Pallant will be here from the Pacific Rim Institute. And it's always fun when he visits because they're always doing something out there.
So he's going to update us on what they're doing. So,
Gabriel coming about the music machine.
I thought so.
You'd sent out a notice about Gabriel doing something from the library, doing something about the music player? Or is it only at the?
oh, that's just at the library.
Oh, I thought it
Yeah,
was gonna be
which
here.
it'll be a cool program too, but I don't know what date that is. Do you?
It's a Saturday.
Say it was
There's a
the-
flyer in our
it was
window,
the
but he's,
12th.
the program's having a music on Edison cylinder players. And which, we have one, or well, we have one on exhibit. We've got 3 in our collections, different kinds. But there's a fascinating story right there. But thank you, everybody. Come next week, 2 o'clock. I won't be here. I'm going to be camping out in the woods somewhere next week. But Cassie will be your host next week, our archivist. And we do these every week at 2 o'clock when we can get good speakers. And thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you to our other speakers.